I was terminated by a late-night call while closing a $1.2 billion global contract. I quietly activated the new agreement. The next day, $1.2 billion signed under my name. I-29F. Never thought a single phone call could change everything. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, and I was hunched over my laptop in the dim glow of my home office, finalizing the biggest deal of my career. 18 months of negotiations, countless sleepless nights, and more international calls than I could count had led to this moment. The Meridian Global contract was worth $1.2 billion, and I was 3 signatures away from closing it. My phone buzzed. The caller ID showed my boss's name, and my stomach dropped. Nobody calls at midnight with good news. He told me the company was restructuring. Budget cuts. My position was being eliminated effective immediately. 24 hours to clean out my desk. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. No thank you for the years of dedication. No acknowledgement of the massive deal I was about to close. Just cold, corporate efficiency. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, watching the cursor blink in the signature field. The irony wasn't lost on me. They just fired the person who was about to hand them the biggest contract in company history. That's when I noticed something interesting in the contract language. During the endless revisions over the past month, there had been a small change to the signatory clause. Instead of requiring the signature of the designated company representative, it now read, the authorized negotiating agent. A subtle difference that most people would overlook. I was still technically the authorized negotiating agent until my termination became official at 9 a.m. tomorrow. My finger hovered over the trackpad. The Meridian executives were waiting for the final signatures. They'd been clear that any delay could jeopardize the entire deal. I thought about my colleagues who would lose their jobs in the restructuring. I thought about the promises my company had made and broken. I thought about how they'd just discarded me like yesterday's coffee. I clicked submit. But instead of routing the contract through the company's standard processing system, I activated a clause I'd quietly negotiated weeks ago. A personal consultation agreement that would redirect the commission structure if certain conditions were met. Conditions that had just been met when they terminated me while I was actively closing the deal. The next morning, I walked into the office with my cardboard box, just like they expected. My former boss was practically bouncing with excitement. He asked me about the Meridian contract, whether I'd managed to get it signed before my departure. I told him I had indeed finalized everything. The relief on his face was almost comical. He thanked me for my professionalism and said the company wouldn't forget my contribution. I nodded and continued packing my desk. What he didn't know was that the $1.2 billion contract was now structured as an independent consulting agreement, with me as the primary consultant. The legal language was airtight. I'd spent months perfecting it with the help of a lawyer friend who specialized in contract law. By noon, the Meridian executives had confirmed receipt of the signed agreement. They were thrilled to finally move forward after months of delays. The wire transfer authorizations were already in motion. I was halfway home when my phone started ringing. First my former boss, then the department head, then someone from legal. I let them all go to voicemail. The first voicemail was confused. My boss had discovered that the contract wasn't showing up in the company's system. Could there have been a technical error? The second voicemail was concerned. Legal had been contacted by Meridian about some questions regarding the payment structure. The third voicemail was panicked. They'd figured out what had happened. I spent the weekend at a coffee shop, working on my laptop and ignoring the increasingly frantic calls. By Monday morning, I had 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails. The last one was from the CEO himself, asking me to come in for a meeting. I arrived at the office wearing my best suit. The same conference room where they'd announced the restructuring was now filled with executives, lawyers, and people I'd never seen before. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The CEO asked me to explain what had happened with the Meridian contract. I calmly walked them through the timeline. How I'd been terminated while actively closing the deal. How the contract language had evolved over months of negotiations. How I'd fulfilled my obligations as the authorized negotiating agent right up until my termination became effective. Their lawyer argued that I'd acted in bad faith, that I'd stolen company property. I pulled out my own legal documentation. Every email, every revision, every approval they'd given me over the past 18 months. The authorization to modify contract terms. The explicit permission to negotiate directly with Meridian executives. The room fell silent as they realized the scope of what had happened. I hadn't stolen anything. I'd simply executed a contract exactly as they'd authorized me to do. The head of HR suggested we could work something out. Perhaps reinstate my position, maybe even with a promotion. I thanked them for the offer, but explained that I'd already accepted the consulting role with Meridian, the same role that was now worth significantly more than my previous salary. Update 1. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Meridian was thrilled with their new consulting arrangement. The project I'd been working on for months was now moving forward under my direct oversight, but with much better terms than my former company had been offering. My former colleagues started reaching out. Some were angry, thinking I'd betrayed the company. Others were curious about how I'd managed to pull it off. A few were impressed and wanted to know if I was hiring. The company tried several legal approaches. They claimed breach of fiduciary duty, theft of trade secrets, and violation of my employment agreement. Each attempt fell apart under scrutiny. My lawyer had done her homework well. Every action I'd taken was technically within the bounds of my authorized role. The most satisfying moment came when I received a formal letter from their legal department. They were prepared to offer me a settlement to resolve this matter amicably. The amount they offered was exactly what my severance package would have been. I declined. The Meridian project was everything I'd hoped it would be. Working directly with their executive team, I had the freedom to implement strategies that my former company had been too bureaucratic to approve. The results spoke for themselves. 3 months after my termination, I received another call from my former boss. The company was struggling without the Meridian contract. The restructuring had backfired, and they were facing their own financial difficulties. He asked if I'd consider coming back as a consultant. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Update 2. 6 months later, I was running my own consulting firm with 3 employees, all former colleagues who'd been laid off in subsequent rounds of restructuring. The Meridian success had led to other opportunities, and we were booking projects faster than we could handle them. My former company made one final attempt to reclaim the contract. They filed a lawsuit claiming that the Meridian deal rightfully belonged to them. The case lasted 8 months and cost them more in legal fees than they would have made from the original contract. The judge's ruling was decisive. I had acted within my authority as the authorized negotiating agent. The contract modifications had been properly approved through the company's own processes. The termination timing was unfortunate but didn't invalidate the agreement. The local business journal picked up the story. The headline read, "Former employee turns termination into million-dollar opportunity." The article focused on the importance of understanding contract language and the risks companies face when they don't properly manage transitions. My former boss reached out one more time after the article was published. He wanted to apologize for how everything had been handled. He admitted that the timing of my termination had been a mistake, that they should have waited until after the Meridian deal was finalized. I appreciated the apology, but I told him I wasn't angry anymore. If anything, I was grateful. Being terminated had forced me to take a risk I never would have taken otherwise. Update 3. A year after that midnight phone call, I was sitting in my own office, looking out at the city skyline. My consulting firm had grown to 12 employees, and we just signed our third 8-figure contract. The Meridian executives had become close partners. They'd been so impressed with the results of our initial project that they'd hired us for 2 additional initiatives. The relationship that started with a desperate midnight signature had evolved into something much bigger. I still thought about that night sometimes. How different things might have been if they'd waited just one more day to terminate me. If they'd shown even a basic level of respect for the work I'd been doing. But I'd learned something important about corporate loyalty. Companies will always prioritize their bottom line over individual employees. The key is making sure you're protecting your own interests while you're protecting theirs. My phone buzzed with a text from one of my former colleagues. She'd just been laid off in another round of restructuring and wanted to know if I was hiring. I smiled and typed back that we should talk. The company that had terminated me was still struggling. They'd lost several major clients after the Meridian situation, and their reputation in the industry had taken a hit. Word travels fast in our field, and other companies had started questioning their contract management practices. I'd heard through industry contacts that they were considering bankruptcy. The restructuring that was supposed to save money had cost them their most valuable relationships. I felt a twinge of sympathy for my former colleagues who were still there, but I'd learned not to look back. The midnight phone call that had seemed like the end of my career had actually been the beginning of something much better. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planning elaborate schemes or seeking dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's simply being prepared when opportunity meets preparation, even if that opportunity comes disguised as a termination call at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. The $1.2 billion contract that was supposed to save their company had instead launched mine. And every time I signed a new deal, I remembered that moment when I had to choose between bitterness and strategy. I chose strategy, and it made all the difference.